peque por el Santiago de Estero de nuestra ciudad. Quiero preguntarle, el partido ha sido bastante reñido y que ha afectado mucho la temperatura para el equipo en esta situación.
Gonzalo García de salir. Mani Livo para ganar el partido. Remate de Livo que afuera. Remate de Livo que afuera. Desperdició la oportunidad.
Okay, so it's the morning after the I suppose the morning before. It was already the night before because it was in the early hours of the morning that the Springboks left. We've all had very little sleep. We all a bit worse for wear, and I'm joined again by Gavin Rich. We're going to just dissect a bit the Boks loss to Argentina, 1 point loss in Santiago del Estero in 36-degree heat. And I think let's start with the elephant in the room, Gav. Mani, the Boks kick. To me, and I'll just go first. I mean, to me, it's while the Boks shouldn't have let Mani be in that position in the first place. I think at the end of the day, you're an international 10. That was a regulation kick. You'd expect a guy like that to make a kick like that, and that's Mani's job. And I'm a bit worried what it's going to do to his confidence. I think the fact that he hasn't played for a long time is a factor, and yeah. I know a lot of people are going to blame Mani. He's not to blame for the Boks result, but he's probably has to take some blame that they didn't win.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm the first to agree with those who say that you can't just blame the kicker when he misses a kick. You know, another kicker might have missed his. And we mustn't forget that the Pumas actually missed a couple of kicks at posts as well. So if the Springboks had won, then they could blame their kicker for not being 100% on point either. The thing with Mani is that it sort of goes to the heart of where the Springboks are at the moment is in their selection policy. If that was a World Cup final, Rassie would have kept Andre Pollard on the field at centre to kick. I mean, that was what confounded me watching the game. When Mani came on, I just assumed that Lecanio or Jesse had gone off. Because either of them could. I mean, Jesse could have gone off to let Lecanio move to 13, and Jesse's played a lot. So, you know, you could argue that he could do with the rest. You know, I just assumed that Andre was there to still do the kicks because it was obvious it was going to be a close game, and you almost sensed that it was going to come down to a kick in the end. My problem with Mani isn't so much his general play. And he is a good international fly half. He did make mistake last night apart from that kick, and you'll remember that line penalty that went sort of directly into touch and goal.
Yeah, I was going to say that was to me that was almost more crucial than the penalty at the end because the Boks were getting some dominance there and they could have scored from there.
Exactly. So I mean, look, and the Boks were 2 points ahead. If they'd scored then, they would have gone more than a score ahead. Well, conversion, of course. I mean, he probably would have missed it, but the Boks would have gone at least, and that's pretty much the game. The All Blacks, I mean, the Argentinians could only come back and draw from there. And what happened then was that he missed that kick. Well, it ended up with the play being transferred back, several meters. And then the Argentinians, I keep saying All Blacks for some reason, Argentinians ended up back in the South African half. And that was when they got that penalty, which effectively won them the game. So I agree with you completely. That was more of a mistake. But that speaks to what you were saying now about not playing that much. If I was really good at something and I was being chosen to sort of to perform what I'm good at, and I only did it like once every now and then. When last did Mani play? I think it was against Portugal, where he only played a half. He played the first 40 minutes of the Portugal game. That's a long time ago. I went on holiday after that. I feel like I've had a whole lifetime since then. That's the last time Moni's been on the field for the Boks. So where's he getting the confidence from? Where's he getting the momentum? And that's not, I'm not blaming Rassie for that because we obviously do have the other fly half in Sasha Feinberg and Gomazulu, and we still do have Andre. So it's not like I'm saying, well, he should be choosing Mani. But I'm just saying that is a bit of a mitigation in Mani's defense. If you're only playing 10 minutes or half an hour here and there, and you're doing it like once every 2 months, then it is difficult. But to me, the crux of the issue is that I don't believe, and I think I have said it to you before. We've spoken about Mani before on this forum, And I think I have said, and it's there to get people go back to listen. I said that my problem isn't so much Marnie as a player, as a fly half, because I think he's international class. I think we need to have somebody else doing the kicking, like Percy Montgomery did when Butch James was the fly half in the 2007 World Cup. Like countless other people in other positions. Lee Halfpenny was never a fly half, and he did so much good kicking for Wales. We need to actually sort of come to a point, if we're going to play Marnie, where Sasha Feinberg and Gomazulu either plays centre or fullback, or Polly is at centre.
I think the point that I mean, to your point there, I agree with you 100% in terms of Marnie being a playmaker and an international class player in terms of that. I think in a lot of ways, the same thing sort of happened with Damian Willems at the start of his career as well. He also seemed to lose a lot of confidence if he missed a kick. And as soon as they took the goal kicking abilities away from him, he's flourished as a fullback in the Springbok squad. When he comes back from injury, he should be the number one fullback for the Springboks anyway. The only concern I have at the moment is that we're getting to a point where we've got Damien who's like that, Marnie who's like that. Sasha's the obvious one who's got the BMT that should take over the kicking, but he's probably not there just yet. We're in that situation now where we're probably in a bit of a limbo. By the time we get to the next World Cup, hopefully all this will be sorted. But I think it's a bit. I don't think the box should have put Marnie in that position. But when he was in that position as a 10, you're supposed to make those kicks.
We need to get to a point where we've got a goal kicker that's basically a metronome. I remember I used to always refer to Bram van Straten as a metronome. I mean, Bram wasn't always the greatest player, and he was good for the Stormers in that one season. But at Bok level, he wasn't always that great. But he never ever missed a kick. So if you've got to go somewhere. And Percy late in his career, people forget that at the beginning of his career, Percy was a bit of a nightmare. But at the end of his career, and Ruan, we mentioned it the other day, Ruan Pienaar. And the point that I was making about Ruan Pienaar, if you remember, is that I was saying that Marnie actually isn't one of those guys who lets his personal game suffer because he misses a kick. He's not like Ruan Pienaar was at the start of his career, where if he missed a kick, he sort of turned into a basket case. Marnie actually still played well. I think if there was a little bit of rust on Saturday or last night or in the early hours of this morning, it was on Marnie's part. It was because of what we said earlier, that he just hasn't played a lot. So that was the problem. If we were playing in a World Cup final, Rassie would have kept Andre on the field to kick the goal, and that's really what I'm saying. The bottom line for me is that we're still in a position, and that sums up the whole game yesterday. We're still in a position where we're obviously we want to win the Rugby Championships, which you have, by the way. As far as I'm concerned, we have won the Rugby Champion. Nobody's really talking about that. I mean, that one bonus point last night, and the fact that we didn't let the Argentinians get a bonus point, try scoring bonus point, means that it is impossible for the Argentina to win. I mean, they have to win by something like 50 points in Nelspruit, and that's not going to happen. It's more likely to actually happen the other way. Now just looking at that move on Rassie's part, a lot of people will criticize Rassie, but that's Rassie's sort of attitude at the moment, is that we need to risk things in order to go forward. And to me, the whole game yesterday, I mean, we'll probably get to later on, is revolved around the opening 20 minutes where I thought we almost ran ourselves off our feet. I haven't seen the Boks play that quick.
We're gonna get to that. I just want to make one last point about Marnie's. I think the danger for me at the moment is because of what happened in the World Cup, because of all that sort of stuff around Marnie at the World Cup, and the fact that he was yanked 30 minutes in the semi-final, and that must play with a guy's confidence. I mean, it would play with my confidence if I was Marnie, etc. Even though he knows his role in the team, all that things that they say in the press conferences. And now to have this as well, I think he's going to need to be managed. And I think because a lot of people will easily blame him after this. A lot of people are upset about the Boks losing a game, because they don't lose very often lately. But so they're just going to have to look at him in terms of that. So that's my final point on Marnie. We can move on. But
I don't want to move on. I want to go back to Marnie. I mean, just because we're talking about Marnie. Why was Marnie playing last year? Why did he play so many games for the Boks? In case people forget, it's because Andre was injured. Andre can get injured again, We know that Sasha Funberg Ngomazulu can get injured. He's injured at the moment. He's a very physical young player, that guy. He's going to get injured as well. So it's conceivable that we end up in a situation this time next year where Marnie's our only standing fly half. It was why sort of somebody like myself maybe backed Elton Yanshi's longer than other people did, was just because I just looked and I saw, well, what happens when we're down to our fourth fly half. At that particular time, Sia Masuku and people like that hadn't come through. And another thing about goal kick, actually, just because it's the day after the Currie Cup final.
I was going to say the same. That was what I was going to go to now. But
yeah, okay. Yeah. I've seen Jordan Hendrickson miss kicks, very crucial kicks. I remember, in fact, the Lions would have beaten the Bulls in the URC game. I think it was earlier this year. And he had a kick right at the end of the game that he missed. Yesterday, he kicked it from 59 meters, and now he's the hero. Marnie kicked that conversion against Ulster a couple of years ago, and he was a hero.
La Rochelle as well.
And that's why I'm not that worried about Marnie's temperament. I think his temperament is fine. He's just got this weird inconsistency to his kicking that nobody seems to be able to sort out. At one stage, Gareth Wright had sorted him out. He was at one stage he was going through a period where he wasn't missing kicks, but now it's almost as if somebody has missed this, which contradicts my thing about it not being a psychological issue. But somebody's messed with his kick. And in fact, it goes back to the shot clock. I still think that when they introduced the shot clock, and remember, he was like sort of getting the kick in, like as the shot clock was coming to an end. It's almost like he still hasn't sort of conquered that.
Yeah, well, I think probably what would be good for him now is to have a sustained sort of period with the Stormers, with Gareth Wright, where you can work with one kicking coach the whole time. I was going to say, when you said about the Currie Cup, because I mean, I was sitting at a freezing Ellis Park yesterday, and Jordan Hendrickson actually did say after the game, when we asked him about that kick, the first thing he said was, I've missed kicks before, and I missed the one against the Bulls, and that we could have won the game. So, yeah, it's those margins are fine, and I think just probably what made it worse a bit yesterday was the contrast from Jordan kicking a couple of hours earlier that goal to win the Currie Cup, and then Marnie later missing the kick. And because a couple of people also in the comments have sort of pointed it out to me as well after the game as well. So so I don't think Marnie's lost. I would never advocate throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. He's a damn good player. But I think he does need some managing at the moment, and that, as I say, I mean, I'm not one who's going to after we've spoken about this, it's not going to be something that's going to linger on by me. I think the Boks know him well enough. His provincial coaches know him well enough, and they'll get him right.
Well, we won't see Marnie for a while unless there's an injury, and the guy obviously who will play is Sasha. But let's not forget that we've seen Sasha miss a few kicks as well. Yeah. And if my memory serves me correctly, right at the start of the season when he played that very first the first test against Wales. Okay, the first test was actually, I'm actually not talking about that test. I don't know why I'm talking about Wales. I actually meant the first test against Ireland at Loftus. Andre missed a couple of kicks in that game. It didn't have to be as close a game as it was, and I think was there a game against Wales where he did something similar? Like I'm talking 2 years ago. I mean, there are times when even the metronome, as I called it, even the metronome misses kicks. It's just that you want somebody who you can sort of feel, well, this is in an easily kickable position, he's going to get it. Yeah. Whereas with Marnie, you sort of feel, even like watching him play for the Stormers, and the Stormers will get a conversion in a sort of easily kickable position, and then Marnie misses it, and you think, well, what was that all about? So that is the problem with Marnie.
I almost had the feeling last night that if that kick was on the touchline at a hell of a difficult angle, he probably would have got that. But the fact that it was so easy almost counted against him. And I know it sounds weird to say, but I mean, that's a good way to segue to go into the next part of what we want to chat about, is the attack. Because I think what we saw yesterday, to me, was very much that we saw in that second test against Ireland. We had the Boks they were making the same sort of mistakes on attack that they did against the All Blacks as well. They were good on attack. I'm not talking about the first 15 minutes, because there was a helter-skelter first start. They were relentless.
That was perfect, right?
They were relentless. And but after that, it was almost, they were forcing passes again. And I know this is all part of the evolution of Tony Brown, but I just felt in the past what they did, and they could have last night as well, played badly and still won. And that's the quality of the team at the moment. But the attack is still not where it needs to be, and it's still evolving. And that's probably what put them in that position last night. Of course, the crowd and everything helped Argentina as well when they got a sniff. The yellow card helped them. We'll get to that as well. But yeah, I just know your thoughts on the attack.
I don't know if I quite agree that there's that much wrong with the attack. I think what went wrong last night, there were two. There was also that game in Sydney, and to me there was a massive similarity between what happened in Sydney and what happened in San Diego later in the day. I think I actually spoke to you after the Sydney game. I don't know if you watched the Sydney game as closely as I did, but I watched that entire game, and I remember sitting there initially and thinking this is too easy. And it's almost like the New Zealanders having sort of had to up their game against South Africa and playing at a different level, because those tests were a very different level to any others. The New Zealanders were on a different level to the Australians. Australia, their defence was hopeless. They were all over the place. They had absolutely no line speed, and it looked as if when the All Blacks went 21-0 up and then 28-7 up, it looked as if they were going to sort of threaten that 67 points that the Argentinians scored, managed against the Pumas, against the Wallabies a couple of weeks ago. That's what it really looked like, and I think it seduced the All Blacks into thinking this is going to be easy and we can just like keep racking up the tries, and they almost start looking at the end score rather than looking at like just getting the result. And something, I wouldn't say it's similar with the Boks. I think that to some extent the Boks almost like ran themselves out in their feet. Now, I haven't seen the Boks play with such tempo. I mean, at the start of that game, I remember watching it and thinking it's almost like they after playing the All Blacks, they're now bringing that kind of intensity into an Argentinian game. And that Argentina just weren't able to cope with it, which they weren't initially. But remember, we weren't there. I mean, 36-degree heat, 37-degree heat, apparently. I mean, that's a really, really hot day to be playing. So maybe that's a learning curve for Tony Brown and company, is that, you know, for goodness sake, and remember, Tony has been coaching quite a few years in Japan, where it's always hot. So the guys are conditioned there to, well, it's always hot. It's you know, at certain times of the season. When we were there at the World Cup, the initial part of the World Cup in 2019, it was ridiculously humid and hot. So he's used to that. But the Boks, to me, like almost just started too much helter skelter. And I was watching the game with mates, and I said to them, even when it was 17-0 and the Argentinians had, I said, we have to be careful we don't run ourselves off our own feet here. So I think that's what happened. So I'm not so sure I'm that worried about the attacking game. I think that the attacking game worked perfectly in those first minutes. If you want to do a 15-minute video on where the Boks could go with Tony Brown as a coach and how they could be, then that 15 minutes last night is the one that you should actually show to everybody and say, this is where the Boks can go. And they can. That's why I'm not as negative about last night's defeat as everybody else, because I see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, this is not, by no means is our chat, end of the world negative. We're not back in Alistair Coetzee territory, back then where the Boks were at that stage. I think to me, the thing is, what I was trying to say is, it's not that it's negative, it's just that they're evolving and we're still stuck in that. And
that's growing pains.
Yeah, those 15 minutes, exactly, growing pains. Those 15 minutes were wonderful, but at other times, they sort of tried the same thing over and over, and when it didn't work, the pass is still going astray. We're not quite there yet, and it's understandable when you're in the first year of. I believe they'll get there by the time. Hopefully, they'll get there by the time the next World Cup comes, and I think Russie's earned the right to have that trust with 2 World Cups, that he knows what he's doing. It's just that at times it felt like we forced some of the passes, and the same against the All Blacks, and they got away with it.
The All Blacks did as well, by the way. The All Blacks did as well. They also forced passes, so it was a very similar thing. I mean, it was, to me, the All Blacks are in a worse position than us, because I think that the All Blacks suffer from just playing against Australia. We know that we can beat, because we've just beaten the All Blacks twice. I mean, that's what this Rugby Championship will be remembered for, is South Africa beating New Zealand twice. It won't be remembered for losing to Argentina, unless they lose again in Nelspruit, which I don't think will happen. It won't be remembered for losing to Argentina, just like the 2009 Tri-Nations triumph, which was our most dominant. Well, okay, 1998 was also quite dominant, but it was one of our most dominant Tri-Nations performances. isn't remembered for the fact that they lost the penultimate game 21-6. It was quite a one-sided game in Brisbane to Australia. And they then had to, the following week was a decider in Hamilton. It's not going to be remembered like that. The South African rugby is on a good track. They've beaten, they've got 2 World Cups. They've just beaten New Zealand twice. They can afford to go through those ways. And let's not forget that there's also the selection changes. This isn't a settled. I mean, I sometimes watch overseas people like the guys on Breakdown in New Zealand talking about like the settled Springbok team. It's not. They're experimenting so much. They've got 2 locks. They've had 2 locks playing yesterday that have between them like not much more than like probably like 13 caps. And where there were problems with the lineouts yesterday. The game wasn't something that I sort of was completely unexpected to me. You remember when we were previewing the game, I sort of thought I thought the Boks would win, but I said that the Argentinians are a lot more unpredictable now. They're more like the French of the 1970s and 80s now than they have been for the last couple of years. A lot of people always talk about the unpredictability of the Argentinians, and up until Philippe Contamponi took over as coach, that was rubbish. I think that they were like a graded down version of ourselves. They relied a lot on physicality and that sort of thing. They've now sort of like starting to back their skill sets and playing what I think I also said to you. I said that the danger with Argentina is they remind me a little bit of what it must be like if you were coaching a team against the Stormers. You can never really be completely settled because the type of rugby that they're playing now, they can suddenly score 3 tries. I mean, who scores 26 unanswered points against the Springboks?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% there in terms of that. And I don't think this is a train smash for the Boks. I know it's disappointing. We're all disappointed that the Boks lost, etc. I think there's elements of the game that disappointed me, and I think that's what people in these chats, that's what we're trying to say. It's not that we're saying fire the coach, everything's gone wrong, it's the end of the world. What we're saying is and exactly like the Boks would do on Monday or Tuesday when they get to review the game, they'll go through it with a critical eye and they'll say, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. That doesn't mean the whole game was wrong. This is where we need to improve. And I think the Boks at the end of the day, they have got one hand and probably 4 of the other 5 fingers around the Rugby Championship already. The Argentina needs to win with a bonus point. South Africa needs not to get a bonus point. They need to deny us one. And they need to win by 38 points to overcome the points difference. That's not going to happen even in Argentina. So I don't see the Boks will win the Rugby Championship this weekend. It's not a bold claim. I think you're quite logical if you say that's going to happen. But it's going to at least makes it interesting this week. I think the elements of the game that people forget, and you've been to Argentina, you know that crowd is extremely hostile. We could see it; they were extremely hostile. We could see how it lifted the players as well. I think what disappointed me was the way the Boks fell off tackles at times, and that can be a sign of the selection of not a settled team. A lot of those players, we took a gamble by leaving 7 players back at home. These players have done the job before, so there was a lot that they could learn out of a situation from the Boks. Defensive-wise, they'll have a lot of work to do, and I think they'll be a lot better this week as well. But there was parts of that game that they know they should have been a lot better.
Yeah, well, I think yesterday was actually what Rassie wants to see. I mean, we all get sort of upset about the Boks losing, but Rassie's always been about the bigger. I mean, they sacrificed games against Argentina and Australia in the 2018 Rugby Championships. It was Rassie's first Rugby Championship because he was focusing on beating the All Blacks in Wellington. And fortunately for the Boks, they did beat the All Blacks in Wellington. So that's what we remember that 2018 championship for. I also think we need to sometimes give some credit to the opposition, and the world is changing.
Very much.
I mean, the Proteas cricketers have just lost 2 games to Afghanistan and ODI. And that's obviously a train smash in that sport. But Afghanistan aren't what they were 10 years ago. That would have been a major disaster. I was at Kings Park, as I think you were, when the Boks got thumped by Argentina in 2015.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like seen as an absolute disaster because the Argentinians just didn't beat South Africa in those days. And I think it was a year later that Alistair Coetzee's team went overseas and they lost there. But that Argentina team has won forget about I mean, last night they won that game at home. So you'd always give them a chance of beating the Boks or anybody at home. But they've actually traveled to New Zealand a couple of times now and won there. So,
Yeah, 3 times.
So you've got to see that, and you've got to see that context too. Is that this Argentina aren't what they were. Argentina were hopeless at last year's World Cup in my view. Well, certainly in the 2 games they played against England, they were pretty hopeless. But Philippe Contemporaneous seems to get them right. And look, the words that I used before this game is that they're unpredictable. And what is the definition of unpredictable? The definition of unpredictable is that on their day they can be brilliant, on their day they can be pretty woeful, which they were at Eden Park, and which I expect them, funnily enough, to be on Saturday at Nelspruit. They have those days where yesterday, I mean, really, to be honest, it was like, I don't know how many did you actually clock how long it took them to get those 26 points? Because it was that purple patch, really.
It was,
you know what?
Well, the Boks was 17-0 up after 10 minutes. So I think Argentina scored around about, and I'm just going off the top of my head here, around about 15 minutes. So it was 15 to 30. It was about 20 minutes, more or less, that they scored that 26 points. You know what game that actually reminded me of, and I can't remember if you were there or not. And we're going back to a whole different era. 1999 World Cup semi-final, New Zealand against France. And I keep talking about this Argentinian team being similar to France. That game, I sat next to Wyn Gray, the sort of doyen in those days of New Zealand rugby, and they were also cock the hoop. South Africa had lost the day before, and then New Zealand were controlling that game. Suddenly France scored 2 tries, and then they were away. And I remember sitting next to, and some of our fellow colleagues were saying to me, you were very unaware of Wyn, because apparently I was sort of jumping up and down and just so happy, and Wyn was sitting there like he'd seen a ghost. That game yesterday reminded me a bit of that. You get a team like Argentina, particularly at home, an opportunity to get some wind in their sails, and they get wind in their sails. They scored only 3 points in the rest of the game. I mean, that's the bottom line. Yeah. Just a memory. I wasn't at that game at 99, but I do remember. I have a very vivid memory of that. I was in Pretoria and I had to do a night shift at the newspaper subbing, and I remember I'd be in around about 4 o'clock. You probably did those shifts at some point as well. That you had to go at 4 o'clock on a Sunday, the most horrible time to go anywhere in your life. And I left, and I watched the first half, and at halftime I said, okay, I'll get in my car and I'll drive to work. And so I left literally just after halftime. And by the time I walked into the office 20 odd minutes later, the scoreline, it was All Blacks were up by 20 odd points. And when I got there, France were ahead, and the whole game had changed. And I went back and watched it obviously afterwards, but it was just such a shock walking into that. So that was an amazing game. As I said,
and Argentina are going to do that sort of thing now. They're going to start doing that sort of thing.
And I didn't mean to interrupt. People forget Philippe Contemporaneous coached. He played at Leinster. He coached at Leinster. Cullen and is extremely successful coaching system there. So he knows exactly what he's doing, and they've got the players. And I mean, you don't beat the All Blacks in Wellington, like they did. If you're not a good side, very few sides have done that. England can do it this year, even against this All Blacks team. I mean, you got to give them credit. They were exceptional. They scrapped incredibly. They put the Boks under pressure at large points as well. And I think we're going to probably our last point in this, because we are going on quite a bit here, is just where this leaves the Boks team. We can talk about these things for hours, Gavin. You know that. But where this leaves the Boks team, and I think we're pretty much in the same situation this morning. My first thought, and when we spoke earlier, my first thought was 2022, Wales, Bloemfontein. Boks had made a bunch of changes. They played pretty well, but they'd lost by a single point. And it was the end of the world for some people. But in the larger scheme of things, that was probably the game that sort of sorted out the rest of their squad for the World Cup. And I think we're pretty much in the same thing. I think there's probably the challenge is a bit different this time. There's probably a lot more older players who are probably going to fall by the wayside in the next couple of years. And not everybody's going to make it to the World Cup. But in terms of what the Boks learned out of that game in that hostile conditions, will do much more for them than a loss that doesn't really make a difference on the standings in the Rugby Championship.
And that's why I said that Rassie probably got out of yesterday's game what he wanted to get, just like he did in Bloemfontein. I'd hesitate to compare the two games. Playing a game against Wales in Bloemfontein in front of your home crowd is very different to playing in Argentina. As I say, I've toured Argentina as a journalist, and it's a very, very difficult play. We spoke the other day about it not being far from Tucumán. I can imagine that the people who from Tucumán are pretty much the same as the ones from San Diego. So it would have been a very difficult experience. And I also think that this Bok team is in a different space. They should have actually won that game last night. I mean, it wasn't, they butchered it with Marnie missing the kick and making mistakes, and that purple patch that Argentina had. On another day, if they were playing in the same venue again next Saturday, I'd predict the Boks to win again, because they should have actually won. If you looked at the stats, they dominated that game. They just weren't as clinical as they should have been. They didn't finish off. They made those mistakes. That Marnie kick being one example. I know that that's like a repeat of what's happened earlier on in the season, but then, growing pains. We've mentioned that a few times. We mentioned it after the All Black series. They are going to go through growing pains, and because we're changing the team all the time. If this was the Springbok team that just kept they just kept the same team in every game, and then they lost to Argentina, I'd be a little bit more concerned. But they kept making the same mistakes. But Rassie's not giving the guys the combinations a chance to bed in. So you need to see it in that context as well.
Yeah, I suppose in a way it's a compliment for the Springbok team that the fact that we are so disappointed when they do lose. I mean, we've both been around when there's been patches where you just want them to win something, not just, so we're at a very different end of the spectrum at the moment. So it's understandable when people are upset, and you feel they could have won, should have probably won that game. But yeah, Nelspruit's going to be a crowning moment for them. This week, we'll talk later in the week about that game a bit more once we see who's selected. But yeah, I don't see anything else but the Boks sort of getting crowned champions this week, and it'll be very different tune next week.
Well, I'm just going to say that, I mean, I'm not having to travel. I'm traveling a lot further than you are. You just have to go from Joburg to Nelspruit. So this might sound very un-South African, but in some ways, to me, like the fact that we lost means that this game has a whole lot more relevance, and the amount of pit and money I'm going to spend on diesel for my car to get me there is more justified than if they'd won well last night and this game was just a dead rubber. So in a way, I'm sorry about that, South Africans, but I'm actually not that unhappy.
Well, it's going to be a great game next week. I see we've basically got less than a minute left on the Zoom call, so let's wrap it up. We'll chat to you again next week. That's our thoughts on the game. Let us know what you think. Smash that subscribe button, and we'll be back before the next test.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Gav. Enjoy your Sunday. Get some sleep.
Cheers.